Find out what Jeremy Hunt actually does do a week on Thursday, that's November the 17th. Over 500,000 households could be facing heating bills that are more than double those set by the energy price guarantee, which covers now almost all other households. They're excluded from that guarantee because they warm their homes using communal heat systems, known as heat networks. They're generally found in some blocks of flats and housing estates, and those count as commercial enterprises. As a result, they're not covered by the rules that protect most domestic energy customers. Well, Money Watch reporter Dan Whitworth has been investigating after one of our listeners got in touch. Dan.
Well, that listener, Paul, is Zahab Jamali, who lives in a block of flats in East London. Now, a couple of weeks ago, he got a letter from the company which runs his heat network, Insite, telling him his heating bill was going to be 11 to 12 times what it was last year.
In short, I was just completely in shock because I immediately took out a calculated because it seemed like 11, 12 times. And the whole weekend, all the residents, to my understanding, were just discussing this and how to deal with it. So everyone was very concerned because in any case, we considered that heating and energy bills are very high. And this just took it to a next level. I've never heard any energy or gas or anything being increased by 11, 12 times.
Well, Dan, we've heard about big price rises for months now for energy, but not 11 or 12 times what they were last year. What's happened here?
Well, I know, Paul, you're going to be speaking to the managing director of Insite in just a few moments, but the company subsequently updated its price increase. So Zahab won't now be paying a bill 11 or 12 times what he was paying last year, but nonetheless, it'll still be nearly 4 times more. That's double what most people who get their energy on main supply will be paying.
Yes, and it's strange that quadrupling your bill is good news for Zahab, but that didn't come until after a week or two of great anxiety, did it? And why do they pay even 4 times more than most households? Or 4 times more than they did, I should say.
Of course. Well, official figures, Paul, say there are 14,000 heat networks across Britain which supply heating to around 500,000 homes. But users don't get the same protections as people on mains, gas or electric. They're not regulated by Ofgem. So in the past, they didn't benefit from the price cap. And now, as you said, they're not covered by the government's energy price guarantee, which of course caps the unit price of energy for domestic users. They're just a couple of reasons why Zahab wants to see heat networks better regulated.
We are still concerned. They're saying it will be substantially more, and then it will be genuinely a very correct step for the government to regulate these suppliers, because people on low income, single parents, or anyone who has got difficulties will struggle to pay these kind of sums. There has to be some kind of a check on these energy companies, I believe.
And Dan, what's the government had to say to you about all this?
Well, it told us people on heat networks will receive the same level of support this winter. And remember, that's payments worth hundreds of pounds as people on standard energy contracts, and that they'll be protected by the Energy Bills Relief Scheme that helps businesses. Now, finally, that the government is, quote, working at pace to determine the most practical way of getting that support to people.
Thanks, Dan. Well, listening to that is Anthony Coates-Smith. He's the managing director of Insite, the company that not only manages Zahab's heat network, but also supplies another 30,000 households. Anthony Coates-Smith, your company sent that letter to hundreds of households saying their energy bill was going up 11 or 12 times. How did that happen?
Good afternoon, Paul. So we did issue that letter, and of course I fully understand and I completely empathise with the anxiety that horrendous increases in cost are causing, and particularly for residents that are already struggling to make ends meet. But like other service providers during this crisis, we have the task of communicating bad news, even if we would rather not. And in this case, in order to comply with the Code of Best Practice, we have to give residents 4 weeks' notice of an increased tariff such that they can plan ahead. And it's really important to state that this is a not-for-profit heat network, so the increase is entirely driven by the renewal of the inbound gas contract. And that
sure, but it was the wrong amount, wasn't it?
It was an amount that was prior to the commercial cap being brought in by the government's EBRS, and we were subsequently, within just a few days, able to agree with the heat supplier that the tariff would reduce to incorporate the commercial cap. So whilst it's still it's an increased rate of 3.7 times, a very unwelcome one, it does now at least benefit from some level of support and protection.
Yes, but 3.7 times is nearly twice as much as the rest of us face compared with last winter. And that, I think, is why Zahab said he wants to see companies like yours, the heat network industry in general, brought under the regulation like, British Gas and Scottish Power. Is that a good idea?
100% a good idea, and it's something that we at Insite and I personally have been calling for in excess of 8 years. The move to legislation has been slow, and as a result, there is bad practice in the industry. Unfortunately, the increase of 3.7 times isn't part of that bad practice. It's a consequence of much wider macroeconomic conditions in the gas commodity market. But yes, we agree, regulation will bring benefits to residents. It is actually due to come in, we hope, in spring 24 with Ofgem. So, we wait to see how good that regulation is.
Sure. And one of the problems that's been raised with us is efficiency or inefficiency. A typical gas boiler, I believe, is around 85% efficient. Well, I'm told heat networks, even good ones, are only 50% efficient. That means energy that people are paying for is being lost.
Yeah, efficiency, it's a very varied picture, and I would disagree with the average or the best case scenario that 50% of energy is being lost. But energy efficiency and heat loss within a heat network is the unseen enemy of heat networks, and it is genuinely a real driver of costs to residents. And it's one of the things that we, in the industry, need to target more. Again, we have been calling for better practice to do with maintenance, to do with design, to do with monitoring of the efficiency of heat networks such that they can operate well.
And that would that help reliability? Because I'm also told that with heat networks, there is a chance your heating will just go off several times a year.
I think those are edge cases of poorly maintained or designed or poorly operated plant. I don't think that is a normal experience of residents connected to heat networks, and it would certainly be no worse than residents connected to their own in-home combi boiler, for example.
But they're inefficient. People aren't in control of them. There's no ombudsman. You lose half the heat generated in some cases. I mean, this seemed like a good idea when they started, but isn't it just a failed idea, and people should just be allowed to take control of their own heating and their own costs?
No, not at all. I think in many situations where there is bad practice, a bad practice finds its way into the spotlight far more easily than good practice. You don't have to look too far afield to see examples of good practice. And I think if you look at our European neighbours who are experts in heat networks, in Denmark, 1.8 million homes are connected to a heat network. During the energy crisis, only 1.6 million of those homes saw no increase in price as a result of the gas market.
Well, that is not the UK.
Well.
That is not the UK, is it? Anyway, Anthony,
these examples do exist in the UK. As you mentioned, we supply 30,000 properties, and the majority of those actually do perform very well. But there are sadly edge cases where regulation will help, we hope, in driving better practice.
Anthony Coates-Smith from Insite, thanks, and I'm sure we'll be hearing from our listeners about those points. A new analysis of more than 50,000 bank accounts given exclusively to Moneybox this week suggests more than half of NHS and public sector workers who are eligible to get cheaper broadband are missing out. These customers are paying